Well, we try and deliver the goods when it gets down to the thickness of college football at the end. And there's not a better guest that we could bring on in our realm, in this Game of Thrones college football world realm that we live in. Our friend from the Josh Pate College Football Show. I'm not going to say late kick, even though I just said it. Our buddy Josh Pate. JP, what is up, dude?
I don't know. I have no idea. Do you know what's up? Do
No.
any of you know what's up? Do you have the slightest idea that Syracuse could beat Miami, Georgia Tech could beat Georgia, USC could make their season by beating Notre Dame, and Mushroom Cloud just every week now? Mushroom Cloud.
It is, and it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful poetic chaos that I think anybody could ask for. But speaking about chaos, there's so much we want to get into with you, JP. But the first thing. And I put this out on social media over the weekend after, we kind of got the results from the game. Texas A&M and Texas. To me, this is without a doubt the biggest game, at least in my lifetime. I'm not going to go back 1940, even, 93 or whatever, in Texas A&M football history. You're playing a huge rival. Your first chance at a berth to play in Atlanta in the SEC championship game, a possible college football playoff berth as well if you're able to just win out. After getting that third loss. When you look at this Texas A&M team and this game, do you agree with me? Is this a generational moment for the Texas A&M fans? I call it the great-grandchild moment where they're going to be talking about this game if they win for years.
Yeah, it has red letter weekend potential on it. If you're a believer in Mike Elko, you believe bigger times are to come. Mm-hmm. But if we were to go back to like the beginning of any run, the beginning of Dabo's run, Nick Saban's run. You can go back to Alabama when he first played Florida and Tim Tebow or something like that. That was sort of beknownst to us, the first domino to fall in a long, long string of dominoes. Could be the same way at Texas A&M. I also think that it's a weird situation. They just lost to Auburn, just heart ripped out, which normally towards this time of year, if it's your second or third loss or whatever, that means your preseason goals are out the window. Well, theirs aren't. So they get to go home and do the whole wounded animal mode thing, and they welcome in a rivalry that we haven't seen in over a decade, but they still have everything to play for as well. I think it could be the environment of the year. I think it could be atmosphere of the year stuff for college football. And I had probably someone who's about 20 years old. They hit me, not sarcastically, they genuinely hit me in the DMs and said, why do people keep making such a big deal about Texas and Texas A&M? Like, explain that game to me. And I realized because it's been 11 years, you got really young adults who don't grasp the hatred. Like, they don't understand that game, and they'll see Saturday, but they don't understand what that game meant, what that matchup means, the clash in culture that is Austin versus College Station. It's really incredible. I'm going to fly into Austin and go to College Station this Saturday, so I dip my toe into a little of both places. But I can't wait for that, man. What a spectacle.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. I agree with you. It has a chance to be one of the best atmospheres that we've ever seen in college football. Leading up to it, those poor animals in the woods when it's going to be midnight yell aren't going to know what hit them this week. Now, with looking at the other side with Texas, and Josh, I've heard you opine on this, and it's something that me and you agree at a lot of points. But I haven't asked you since the chaos of this weekend, because I keep trying to tell people, whether it's Texas that would finish 10-2, whether it's Indiana that would finish 11-1, you can say, oh, well, they shouldn't make the playoff. That can be your opinion, but you also have to look at the context around them. I feel different about a 10-2 Texas team getting in the playoff now that Alabama has that third loss and Ole Miss has that third loss. How do you feel about if Texas were to lose this game without a quote-unquote signature win, Texas still being able to get in the playoffs at 10-2 because of what has happened around them, which I think when we're breaking this down, we got to look at all aspects of it to see who gets out of the oven last.
So walk me through this. You're suggesting that you have the audacity to have your opinion change as the circumstances change? That's what you're suggesting?
Yeah, look, Josh, I'm and it's not, to me, it's you as an analyst, you just like as a coach, you are a product of the environment and the reality that you sit in today. The reality that we sit in today is different than it was 2 weeks ago. Just like what we may have been running on offense, our bread and butter may have worked a lot better when we're running Q Power against, LSU, as opposed to doing it at, against Oklahoma on the road.
Yeah, so you said as an analyst or as a coach or as a player, how about just as a human? I could say I have no plans on leaving the office for lunch today, but then the vending machine's broken. So I end up in the parking lot pulling out, and you're like, what a hypocrite. Thought you said you weren't going to lunch today. Well, the circumstances changed, man.
Yep.
And the thing about that is no one would call you a hypocrite in that scenario because it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get in the world of sports, when we get in the world of college football, people throw logic and conventional thinking out the window. So I agree with you, is what I'm trying to say. It took 2 minutes too long for me to say it, but I agree with you.
No, as long as you agree with me, we're good. Take as long as you need to get there.
Like I was speaking so demonstrably about Indiana last week and how if they got blown out, I thought if they lost, period, they shouldn't have been in given the status quo last week, but especially if they got blown out. Well, okay, but then everything lost around them. Everyone lost around them. Similarly with Texas. I said last week, you can't just say SEC schedule because there are gulfs between the strength of SEC schedule to SEC schedule this year. So Texas does not play one. And I really, if they lost to Georgia and Texas A&M, wouldn't care about their strength of schedule because the only thing that would be propping Texas's strength of schedule up would be 2 games. And if they lost both of those games, I wouldn't really care about the rest of their strength of schedule. Well, now I kind of still do because now you've lost benefit of the doubt to argue against them, just like you've lost benefit of the doubt to argue against Indiana. So I think they're both in.
Yeah, I agree. Where we sit today.
Josh Pate, overtime in college football is perfection. It's my favorite overtime in all of sports. Better than PKs, better than shootouts. Blaine Patine,
Dark
I see
Josh.
coming out now. Dark Josh. I want to see no aspect of it change, but I will give you an opportunity to change my mind and say your piece, please.
Well, I don't need to explain myself. I'm right. You're wrong. You need to explain yourself. What's right about this?
No, I absolutely love it. I mean, I don't want to see the ball starting at the 50-yard line. I'm fine with the clock not rolling and just continuing the football game. Line up on the 25-yard line. You get a chance to score. If you do, you can kick the extra point, and your opponent gets a chance to have the football, unlike the NFL in many circumstances that we've seen throughout the years. And then if we do that twice and we're going for 2, we distill the sport down to its essence. You line up on the 2-yard line. I'm going to put the football across the goal line. You try and stop me. I love it. What are the most interesting games? When someone goes for 2 at the end and either gets it or doesn't get it, you're forced to do that in this scenario. I love it. Why would we want to change it?
Well, the circumstance that you just mentioned is like reading me chapter 13 of the book without reading chapters 1 through 12. They're going for 2 after they did something to score to begin with. They earned the right to score to begin with, which probably means they put together first downs, they moved the chains, they went the length of the field. What makes no sense to me is we've got this game that exists on a 100-yard field, all that land we paid for. And we've got this clock up here and it runs all game. And then we get to the most consequential time and we say, we're not going to use any of this and we're not going to use that thing. And we're just going to, to me, it's like it's randomizing the outcome. It's not that you don't earn it. I'm not saying that Auburn didn't earn the win the other night, but it's so randomized. And the thing that you're doing to earn that win is so detached from the way the rest of the game works. And I agree with you. I'm not looking to model after the NFL. I'm not looking to model anything we do after the NFL. But to me, if you start on the 50-yard line and give the opponent the opportunity to as well, you're not starting in scoring position. Like right now, you start on the 25, I think. So you can go 4th and 10 and you're still in scoring position. To me, you ought to have to do something to get in position to score.
Well, you had to play the whole game, though. You had to play the whole game up to that point. It's not like we're just meeting at
you played it. Yeah, you played and I played and we played to a draw, which means no one has the upper hand, which means I think that's the way that overtime should work as well. And you can say, oh, it does. Both teams get to alternate the 2 points if you get to the third overtime. That's true. I don't ever think that we should get to that point. I don't even think we should get to the point where we're randomly starting on the 25. I also ask, I have things that are lost by doing it the current way. I don't know what's lost by doing it the way that I'm suggesting, where you start on the 50, both still get an opportunity. It much more resembles what a typical flow of a football game would look like. The only reason they ever adjusted the overtime period was because they didn't want the 7 overtime marathon because of safety of players and everything like that, which I'm okay with. But if you want to shorten it, don't go to this insane alternating 2-point conversion. If you want to shorten it, make someone actually do football and you'll shorten it significantly because you're not going 4 or 5 overtimes with folks starting at the 50. I guarantee you're not.
I had no problem with the previous overtime in college football, and I wouldn't have suggested changing it. But now that I've seen this iteration where you are forced to go for 2, I really like it, and it's balanced and it's fair. And if we're just going to say, well, you start at the 50-yard line, that's arbitrary too. I mean, someone could use your same logic against you and say, well, now you're taking kickoff out of the game. But either way, I will say in practice, when we would have practice, the most important period was goal line.
Yeah.
Everyone practiced it, and it was the most intense portion of the practice. I like the manifesting that if you've already had a chance in regulation and 2 different overtimes.
You know who does overtime right? College basketball. You know what they say? You got 5 minutes. We're going to tip it up. We're going to tip it up from center court, and y'all are going to play 5 minutes. We may get another overtime. We may not.
It's not as entertaining to me.
No,
I like college football.
I'm
just saying, there's no way you watched that Auburn Texas A&M game and it ended like, man, that's.
And thought, man, I'd rather see 10 more minutes of regular play. There's no way.
I agree. I agree with you guys 100%. I will say, one thing I dislike about the way the NFL does it, and again, they've changed it for. Number one, they have 2 different sets of playoff rules, one for the regular season and one for the playoff, which I think is totally asinine to me. If you're going to have one set of overtime rules, have one set of overtime rules. But I do think there's a legitimate argument for both of them, but I still think either way, it is a really, really fun overtime to watch once you start going for 2, because again, we see it all the time. You play the full game, y'all mentioned it, going for the 2 points, and then is sometimes the best option for a team that may not feel good about playing even more snaps and evening it out with the other team. But I think either way, it's pretty damn good.
Go ahead, Josh.
Well, thank you. I would just say this. So they could do alternating paper field goal flicks. And if it's overtime of a college football game, I'm going to watch. I'm going to be entertained by it. So like, does it appeal to me? Does it draw my interest? To me, is detached from, do I think this is the best functioning way to decide the outcome of this game? Because I would be just as glued if you, David just said, well, you're taking kickoffs out of it. Put kickoffs in for all I care and make them go the entire length of the field. Like, I'd be glued to it either way. I'm not saying I'm not entertained. I'm very entertained, gladiator style. I'm just saying the outcome when we resort to that, to me, has always felt detached from like how a football game is actually won. That's all I'm saying.
Well, isn't this too, and Blaine, I don't mean to jump in front of you, but this is a very important point to me, and I want to see what Josh thinks, because he probably agrees with me. I would think. I would assume, even though we know what assuming does. Isn't this a microcosm of the biggest argument we're having in college football overall right now? Is the efficiency argument when it comes to rankings, when it comes to rules and officiating, when it comes to conference realignment, because there's no incentive for anybody at the top to change anything right now, because regardless, here's my money. Here's my money. It doesn't matter if they put 9 teams into the 12-team playoff and 3 of them have 3 losses. We're going to complain. We're going to yell. We're going to say this isn't the most efficient way. I want metrics and numbers we can see, not that's hidden behind some sports analytics company. And then they point me to ESPN, who just so happens to be in a deal with the SEC, to look at those numbers and make it make sense there. Then you look at the FPI and really start asking some questions. But Josh, are we just arguing into the abyss? Because it's more popular than ever now. The only way they can screw it up, I call it the Snickers bar argument. The only way you can screw up a Snickers is if you get overtly political to one side, like we've seen in some professional sports. That's the only way. And guess what? College football ain't doing it. So are we just arguing into the abyss? Are we just yelling it into an echo chamber with each other and nothing's ever going to get changed? Because the money's not getting changed. It's just growing and growing and growing.
Okay, well, first off, I can't believe that you would sit here in front of God and everyone and besmirch the good name of the fill in the advertiser blank playoff predictor on ESPN. I can't believe you can do that. Yeah. I've had this wild theory, and look, we may have to edit this out, but I've had this wild theory that we changed overtime rules not because we cared about player safety at all, but because TV networks got pissed that a 7 overtime game overran into another broadcast window.
Probably.
And we can't have that. Okay. I know that we don't want the players to have boo-boos, but I think there may have been ulterior motivation there. The third thing is, you notice how we had to have a grand total of 1 game go to 7 overtimes before they lurched into action and changed the rule, for the betterment of the game. Yet I watch officiating melt down in fantastic, horrific fashion every Saturday in this sport. And have you gotten an answer? Have any of you heard anything? I gotten an answer? Of course not. Because really, it doesn't affect the bottom line. And the most infantile logic in the room when it comes to college football is actually the most sound logic. If it doesn't mess with the money, they don't really so much care about the integrity and structure of the sport. It doesn't really matter if you, the consumer, are mad because, like Blaine just said a little while ago, in a different vein, but what he said applies to their logic. Hey, as long as you're watching, then what we're presenting must be good enough, which sucks. There's nothing that would make me not watch college football. That's not always coinciding with making the right decisions for the sport.
Well, I certainly don't want to be the guy who's defending the Rules and Regulations Committee or the corporatist decisions behind it. Just on overtime in particular, overtime is detached from regulation, so I'm fine if the format's a bit detached. I like a puck shootout in the NHL. I don't care if they keep playing for 10 minutes. That's just my thing, but I'm not going to sit here and always defend the Rules and Regulations Committee.
Y'all Michigan guys, 231 you buy one quarterback and then you start defending the monster.
College football deep state, I guess.
Hey Josh, I don't hate a lot of people, but these guys are getting pretty close. Referees in college football, the officiating, I didn't think it could get worse, Josh. I couldn't think it got worse, but somehow it magically did. This last weekend, first of all, that Ryan Williams catch, the call in the Auburn game, I've never
the OPI?
I've never seen something like it. Josh, we got to fix it, man. We got to fix it. How do we fix it?
I think you'll be surprised to hear this, but so I've railed on this a little bit this year, and I am not the guy who complains about officiating. I hardly ever do it. I don't do the hot seat stuff, and I don't do blame officials because I actually think their job's really difficult, and I got respect for the guys who do it. I feel like they've been put in a no-win situation. So I think you'll be surprised to learn I've said that a lot this year. I've had white hats from 2 different crews in major college football come up to me before games and actually thank me for speaking out about it. Now, you would think that makes no sense because you're bashing the officiating. Why would the officials appreciate it? They know their process is broken. That's why. When you dive deep on this stuff, you find that it's just as big a mess and discombobulated behind the scenes. It's just as political behind the scenes as any branch of federal government. And so they explained to me in painful detail about how screwed up the certification process is and the different clinics you need to go to and how they're run by people, not so much because those people have earned the right through merit to run those clinics, but because it's backslapping and handshaking and they emphasize one thing here and another thing there. And they're not even clear what they're supposed to be focused on enforcing. And then you get to a situation like the Bama-Oklahoma game the other night. Just an egregiously bad call. People from the space station could see Ryan Williams is not covered up. Okay, but the flag got thrown. Okay, so that's bad enough. That's not reviewable.
Yeah.
That's not reviewable. We can review 12 guys on the field, but we can't review that. So that official, while he makes a terrible call, and that crew was the same one that embarrassed themselves in the Georgia-Texas game, and they ought not have even been in that position, but that's beside the point. It's not up to them to police themselves. No different than it's up to a 5th grader to stop himself from talking out of turn in class. Eventually, the teacher's got to slap the hand. And you would think that's what would happen. But in this world, it doesn't. You guys don't show up to work, or you show up to work and you start just jacking around all day. You get fired. I get fired. We get reprimanded. We get called out. Nothing happens here. And they'll come back and they'll say, oh, we deal with it. We deal with it behind the scenes. Well, no, you don't. And frankly, I don't even care if you do, because what you're doing behind the scenes doesn't work, because the same exact crews that I've seen for 20 years are the ones on the field every Saturday. And the same junk that we've had to settle for, we have to settle for every Saturday. And this is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with this nickel and dime officiating branch. And it makes no sense. You would never build college football like this if you built it today. It's just that way. And you're still using guys that work at their dad's fertilizer farm Monday through Thursday to officiate games time, because that's why. Well, that's the way we've always done it. Great, guys. That's phenomenal leadership. It's wonderful.
Yeah, Josh, I want to see if you would put your name by this, kind of something that I put out there a while ago, and I just want to ask you, and there's a 5th point I've added to it. But before I even do that, it's first off, it's okay to complain about officiating when officiating is bad. Just like it's okay to complain about service at a restaurant if the service is bad. But make sure the service or the officiating is bad before you complain about it. I see somebody who I have respect for saying that, complaining about officiating, you should just never complain about officiating. Well, the team you root for, I probably wouldn't complain about officiating either if that was my team, the way it's gone down the last 10 years to me. But they have a hard job, they do. But you're not a coal miner, you're not a single mother in a bad economy, and even the coal miners get told they're doing a bad job when they do a bad job. So here are my 5 points. You can complain about it if it needs to be complained about. The first one, you make them full-time. You reference that. College football has the money. Officiating is probably the most important part of the game outside of the players actually playing the game. I can make the argument that the officials are more important than the play callers because they are the ones that designate what goes, how the game is played, whether that's football, basketball, whatever. The second, in-conference affiliation with officials. If you make them full-time, it's a very feasible thing. 3, you stop finding people for commentating on officiating. You can criticize everybody in the college football world except them. 4, you appoint an official press secretary for referees to answer questions weekly at a weekly press conference to explain things and dole out accountability for mistakes. I think you would take a big chunk out of any conspiracy theories by just having somebody come out there and say, listen, they screwed up here, this is why, or they didn't screw up here, this is why, this is how we're fixing it. And 5th, we should have a super challenge. It's one super challenge, you can challenge anything. I can't remember if it's the XFL or the UFL, they did it. It is one challenge that if you use it, you only get it once. Even if you hit it, even if they say, no, you're wrong, you can challenge anything one time, and it's not like it's going to slow the game down for 3.5 hours. It's one super challenge. What say you on those accounts?
I would agree with all of them. I would love to hear just an honest-to-God official response from a league office.
Yeah.
Present those points to, the league office in the SEC or the Big Ten. I would imagine their response, well, when their PR firm got back to you 2 weeks later on written paper, their response would be, we can't subject officials to that sort of abuse. We can't allow that sort of scrutiny to befall our officials because it may damage the integrity of the game. To which I would laugh, wad it up, throw it in the garbage, and I would say, do you understand what the current way of thinking is amongst the public? If you watch what happened in that Bama-Oklahoma game, and that flag is thrown, in a world of proliferated legalized gambling, do you understand what the working theory is on how that stuff happens? You're telling me that's better than publicly excoriating officials every now and then? Like, seriously, I think there's a little detachment, and people at league offices are not understanding that it's not just some little whisper campaign that there may be something underhanded happening with these games. That is going to be mainstreamed, and I can't even argue with it if you don't take action and do something about it.
No, I agree with you 100%.
Josh, we've talked at length about some of the negative consequences of expanding the playoffs, some of the negative consequences of expanding conferences while eliminating divisions and not adding more conference games. We see these tiebreaker scenarios right now are pretty insane across the country. But the intrigue in many of these games these past few weeks is undeniable. Where do you stand right now in the 2024 college football season, just holistically?
I am a believer that there are two different things in play here. So I'm a believer that we were headed towards an era of a more leveled out playing field, sort of the tops of the tallest trees being shaved off. We were headed that way anyway. Saban walks out the door, and that overlaps with NIL in the portal a few years in. Like, we were headed towards that. So I'm thinking about it like this. I had one of my cousins the other day. He said, man, think about what the expanded playoff has done for parity in college football. And I said, but we haven't gotten to the playoff yet. Like, you could argue it's put more meaning on more games or something like that if you want to. But if we just had the BCS model this year, the games would still be playing out as they're playing out. Like, there would still be chaos, as many teams wouldn't be in the playoff hunt, but we would still have 2-loss wreckage in the SEC. You would still have what you have happening right now to be better for the Big Ten. But I am a believer that there's a little detachment in the competitive balance piece of the whole thing and the more meaningful games piece, because you define meaning however you want to define it.
I've never 100%.
I've never needed playoff implications to care about a game, but I get if people do. Iowa State, Kansas State means something a lot different to most of the country because of an expanded playoff Saturday. It would have meant something to me because it's a game that's nicknamed Farmageddon, and that's always been good enough for me. But Alabama looking mortal this year, or Georgia getting raced by Ole Miss, and then Ole Miss having the same thing happen at Florida, that's happening regardless of what the playoff structure is.
Well, I've always appreciated that you've made that point. And look, a very mediocre Michigan team is heading to the Horseshoe this week. I care. I care more than a lot of people in the country, right? Because I'm going to be tuned into that game. But it is interesting to see a scenario like Jake was talking about Texas A&M. Texas A&M has a chance this weekend to win and go to the SEC championship and maybe be a first four team. Or they could lose and go 8-4 and maybe be playing in the Music City Bowl.
That's it. Well, there's, like Josh said, Josh, I know you got to run here in a minute, brother, but the distinction needs to be made between excitement in the regular season towards the end and who ends up being the champion. I'll use college basketball again. All right. And I don't know. I'm hoping this is the new wave of college football where we have this parity. But there was a ton of parity in college basketball last year. The regular season was incredible. The conference tournaments were incredible. Who won the NCAA tournament again? UConn. UConn ran through it twice. It was a great, exciting regular season in college basketball. You still had a blue blood win it for the second straight year in a tournament that's even bigger. So on one hand, yes, the expansion of the playoff has made the end of the year more exciting. Tennessee versus Vanderbilt, regardless of what Vandy has done, is exciting this weekend because it keeps Tennessee's playoff hopes alive if they win it. The expanded playoff did that. But let's not make any mistake. At the end of the day, we'll see the two teams or the four teams that are left playing for an appearance in the national championship and then the national championship to full-throatedly be able to say, this was the year of the parrot, the year of parity. So that distinction I think needs to be made.
Hey, by the way, I know everyone's etching the SEC's tombstone this week. Would it not be poetic as the dust settles to have, some random SEC team sneak in there as the 11th seed, and that's the one that goes on a run because college football will look a lot different than what happened.
Well, Josh, why don't you say South Carolina? Just say it.
No,
say it.
I mean, is the world ready to see Alabama in the playoff with 3 losses?
Are they, Josh?
Hey, look, the world wanted this, my friend. The world wanted it. I'm not, but the world better be ready for it. But I just keep thinking to myself, because I've got to text with Danny Cannell like once every hour, so I'm forced to.
Yeah, the Alex Jones of college football.
Yeah, like how crazy would it be if all these folks are, SEC's out of here. Look at what they expanded playoff.
Yeah.
And it's like 10 seed Georgia or Tennessee or Alabama or South Carolina that ends up knocking folks off because they're going to have a better roster than those teams do. That doesn't always equate to better team. But what if you're just sitting there looking up and the final is Texas versus South Carolina? And at that point, I'm looking to the left and right with an ear-to-ear grin saying, this is what you asked for, guys.
Yeah, 9-3 a team that finishes 9-3 in the SEC in the regular season, making the national championship, is an absolute dagger to the heart. Not even like 2 11-1 SEC teams getting there, but a 9-3 SEC team getting there is an absolute dagger. Josh Pate, the Josh Pate College Football Show. Man, appreciate you joining us, brother. I hope you have an incredible Thanksgiving, and we're going to be watching like everybody else, and we appreciate you making time.
I appreciate it, guys. Always fun.
All right, Josh.